what do you got there?
The video game has over 200 games.
Cool, 200 games?
That's right. Over 200 games can be yours with Pro 200.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Little Muppet Monsters. A couple of years back, I rounded up a few video game related advertisements I found to be a bit wanting. One of these ads was for an as seen on TV product called the Pro 200, which was most remembered for its sale pitch that was a bit overconfident.
Never ever buy those expensive cartridges again!
Mind you, my criticisms were aimed squarely at the commercials and not the product itself, for the most part. But just because we've been burned before by the promises of 8-minute abs and perfect pancakes doesn't mean every single as seen on TV product is automatically terrible. So I logged into eBay and bought myself one. Figured it was inexpensive enough to give an honest workout, maybe even see if I could save myself money by never purchasing another game cartridge again. But before I kicked the tires and revved the engine on this kinda cheap feeling piece of plastic, let me give you some background, or at least what I was able to dig up. The Pro 200 was unleashed to the world of direct response television ads and mail order catalogs in 1998. This was a time when polygon graphic video games were just starting to emerge from their awkward phase, and the old monochrome Game Boy got itself a color upgrade. Even Tiger, whose bread and butter were those inexpensive licensed LCD gizmos, forged ahead with a more sophisticated handheld by way of the Game.com. So needless to say, the Pro 200 was a bit of a dinosaur, technologically speaking, sporting 1-bit graphics on a 10x20 playfield of blocks. There is a bit of a mystery as to the company behind the Pro 200. Several releases point to a company known as ProTech, a name so generic it's impossible to search for them on the internet without getting 1,000 completely unrelated results. But alternate packaging, such as this as seen on TV version, doesn't have reference to any company name. Even the instruction sheet has no legal information you normally find tucked away in the small print. So I guess a warehouse of these just instantly materialized out of nowhere, only to be discovered by some sly marketing mastermind who had this grand plan to take over the video game industry with as little effort as possible.
And is not available in stores. Here's how to order.
Whether you called the 800 number, mailed a check to Lillian Vernon, or found one patiently waiting on a thrift store shelf, your new title as proud Pro 200 owner affords you the endless enjoyment of 256 games and 50,000 ways to play. Except, not really. I'll explain later. The handheld game, which fits in your pocket if you don't mind it testing the limits of its stitching, sports the common D-pad design and a single oblong button to the right. The display is hidden nicely in a flip-up compartment, and while I can confirm this is common to all units, mine would literally not open without the aid of a tiny crowbar. The thin lip of the latch broke off as a result, but it's probably better off that way. Inside the compartment, you'll see a full function calculator, which is an entirely separate unit from the game portion. It has its own screen, power buttons, and even a dedicated battery. It's a feature no one asked for, built into a portable LCD game that also no one asked for. But it's here, so let's test it out. 1,329,502 times 4. Okay, calculator calculates. Accuracy on these tiny buttons are a bit trying with my fat fingers, but we used to do math on wristwatches back in the day and we were okay with it. Upon starting the actual game up, you'll be greeted with the startlingly loud strains of chiptune fanfare, along with a somewhat impressive bit of animation. Okay, yeah, it's not dazzling by any means, but considering my expectations of a device that had to show someone throwing out Street Fighter 2 just to get our attention, it's a pleasant surprise. I hope you saved your instructions because you'll be selecting your game here, and due to the limitations of the screen, you're only seeing the number that corresponds to said games. Sure, trial and error will solve the problem of a manual that's gone AWOL, but you won't know their proper Christian names, like Race Car, Shooting Attack, Frogalog, and Swallow Snake's Eggs. Much like the old Atari VCS method of overhyping minor game option changes as different ways to play, the Pro 200 likewise can't help crowing about serving up 256 games with selectable game speeds, giving you this obscene amount of choice. But in reality, there's 16 games with only the slightest bit of variation for each. But in real reality, there's actually only 9 games. Games I through P are all different takes on Tetris. But I think any hopes of this LCD device offering up an endless array of games vast enough to render your 16-bit cartridges an unnecessary nuisance should be abandoned right about now. But first, I should mention the game selection process. The big fire button chooses the game letter, pressing left on the control pad chooses the level, right chooses the speed, and down changes the game variation. I feel like there could have been a better way of doing this. I don't see any way of going backwards in the list. So if you overshoot your desired game, variation, speed, or level, you have to loop back around again. And I can't tell you how many times my muscle memory insisted pressing the big button starts the game, only to realize my mistake when I have to repeat the whole process all over again. It's actually one of those tiny red buttons that fires up the fun. Anyway. The first game, letter A, is Fire Tank Attack. The object? Shoot as many tanks on the screen without getting hit yourself. Your tank has a flashing center to help alleviate some confusion. These things are all relatively large, so as you've probably guessed, it's kinda cramped. Fortunately, the only thing that could hurt you are the bullets. Unfortunately, this type of game just doesn't work within the screen limitations. As far as I could tell, both game variations are the same, and neither of them are terribly fun. Game B is Race Car. It's your basic avoid other things as long as possible scenario here. The button accelerates and the control pad moves you left and right. Get far enough and you'll get bonus points. But otherwise, not much to get excited about here. Variation 1 is a 2-lane highway and Variation 2 is a 3-lane highway, removing the left guardrail. Variations 3 and 4 are the same as 1 and 2, except you're going from top down. Yes, they literally flipped the sprites to help add to their dubious boast of 256 games. It's like holding a mirror to your TV and telling everyone you got 2 games for the price of 1. Game C is Shooting Attack. Shoot the blocks as they come down the screen. If they hit the bottom, you lose a life. In game variations 1 and 2, it plays like any other shoot from the bottom type games, except there's really little challenge and monotony sets in fairly quickly. However, game variations 3 and 4 is a novel combination of Puzzle Bobble and Tetris. Blocks you shoot stay on the screen and add to the descending ones. If you complete a line, those blocks and any underneath that line disappear. And like Race Car, variations 5 through 8 are the same as the first 4, except top down. Game D is Frogalog. I really wanted to be sarcastic about that title, but after naming games Race Car and Shooting Attack, I'm just kind of surprised they didn't call it Frog Jump. It's essentially Frogger. The flashing square is your frog. The object is to jump from log to log to get to the opposite side of the screen without falling in the water. Variations 1 through 4 change the patterns and size of the river. With 5 through 8, you guessed it, the same, but top to bottom. And I have to say, the game is surprisingly challenging. Your frog will not move with the logs, so you'll often find it slipping out from under you if you don't move along with it. And with several logs only 2 blocks wide, even on level 1, it takes some getting used to. Game E is Ping Pong, which is basically your breakout or Orkanoid type paddle and brick game. This is actually one of the more addictive titles on this device, as it's a simple but effective game that's been enjoyed for almost 50 years now. Obviously, the low resolution means that there's a limit to where the ball goes, sometimes leaving you in an endless loop of just barely missing that last brick. There are 32 game variations. While I didn't go through every single one, the variation where you have to return the ball on the top and bottom is by far my favorite of those I have sampled. The instructions don't mention it, but if you hold down the serve button, the ball moves slightly faster. Game F is Swallow Snake's Egg. You may have already guessed. It's the classic game of Snake, found on literally anything that has a display, most famously Nokia phones back in the late 90s. The concept is simple. Keep grabbing the dots with your snake. As you grab them, you'll grow longer. Avoid hitting the wall or yourself. After a certain number of eggs are collected, you'll move on to a new level. By the way, only 2 variations. The second one adds a wall in the middle. Game G is Flying Bees, another shoot from the bottom type game. Your job is to shoot at the pair of bees that fly down from the pile at top. Not much else to it. 8 variations give you double guns or flips the playfield upside down, but otherwise not much variety between them. In case you haven't guessed by now, every game starts with an enthusiastic rendition of 10 Little Indians for no discernible reason. Yes, it gets irritating. Anyway, Game H is Hammer Attack, a boxing game if the manual says so. Your job is to press the control pad in the direction of the punch and counter with your own punch. Every time you mess up, you get an X. 3 of those and you're done. There are 2 game variations, but I can't figure out the difference between them. At this point, I'm beginning to suspect grotesque padding on the part of the programmers to make the marketing team's job a little easier. Games I through P are all versions of a game that resembles, but for legal reasons is not, Tetris. Actually, a better description would be Tetramino game, not to be confused with the shapes called tetriminos, which are registered trademarks of the Tetris company. They are mathematically similar to tetraminos, but with better personalities. Each actual main game of NonTetris has its own gimmick. You have games that push up garbage blocks from the bottom, some move the playfield left or right, some reverse the blocks when you complete lines. You even have ones where the rotate button changes the actual piece, but not the orientation, which takes a frustrating amount of time to get used to. And then you have some that combine one or more of these special rules until you're confused enough that any attempt at strategy is tossed out the window, and you just start flinging blocks wherever, hoping for the best. Each game has 24 variations. This translates to 192 different ways to play a generic Tetramino game. However, not exactly. Some of them do introduce things like bombs and single dot erasers into the mix, but, per usual, some are just upside down versions of earlier variation numbers. What you won't find in any of these 8 rotating block games in any of its variations is a regular, no frills, play until you mess up Tetris. I somewhat suspect that may have been to stave off any potential lawsuits for being too similar to official games licensed by the Tetris company. After the company was founded in 1996, it wasn't long before many internet freeware knockoffs found themselves cease and desisted into oblivion. While I can't definitely say this is the reason why every one of these games has a wacky rule twist, it's certainly a safe assumption to make.
For fast delivery of Pro 200 with over 200 computer games, call 1-800-257-1234.
And that about sums up the Pro 200. Bold, misleading claims aside, it seems like it would have been a halfway decent boredom killer back in the pre-smartphone days. Granted, this wouldn't have quelled any desire to purchase regular game cartridges. I can't even imagine this would have been the most convenient calculator. But for the $20 asking price, plus shipping and handling, it could have been much worse. Did you have one of these? What did you think? Let me know in the comments. One more thing before we wrap up. What if you want to experience the same low-tech electronic gameplay in a sleeker form factor that doesn't resemble a wide butt? Well, for under $20, you could get yourself one of these. Just heat up your soldering iron and follow the questionably translated instructions. I'll be tackling this in a future video, so stay tuned. This was Dave for TeeVee Games. See you next time.
If you can sit, you can get fit. The Hawaii chair.